Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andre Dionysian. I'm the president of the Burbank Student Alliance. With me today is my vice president, Tonio Duchanian, and the presidential candidates for the 2021-2022 school year, Arno Dionysian and Finn Kroll. I will allow each candidate 1 minute to introduce themselves and to answer this guiding question. Why do you want to be president? As determined by a coin toss, Finn Kroll will go first.
Hi, I'm Finn Kroll. I'm a borough sophomore, and I'm running to be the next BSA president. I want to run for president because I believe in representation for all. I believe in speaking out, speaking up, and speaking loudly on matters that concern us. And as BSA president, I'd be able to adequately do that in the best political capacity possible in BUSD at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Arno Dionysian. I'm running to be the next BSA president. I'm a freshman at Burbank High School, and I've been with the BSA since its very conception. I'll talk about qualifications a little bit later, but I see a lot of potential with BSA, and I want to help take us to where I think we can be within the next year.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. So here's how it's going to work. These questions I have are not anywhere online. They are written down in my notebook and my notebook only. The only other person who knows these questions is Tonio Duchanian. He helped me write them. Neither of these candidates have been given a heads up as to the questions or even the topics. They have no idea what they're about to be hit with. That said, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and then we'll have another 1 minute to answer the response. Without further ado, we're going to allow Mr. Dionysian to take the first question. And the first question is this. One of you is a sophomore and the other is a junior. Both of you will be very, very busy next year. Can you assure the students of Burbank that the BSA will be your first priority at all times?
You know, Mr. President, of all my extracurriculars I'm currently in, the BSA is probably the one that I've been in the longest. And I've been in it long enough to know the importance of the position, both of freshman representative, and I've seen how the presidency, how important the presidency is. I've made a note of being as active as possible, and it will be my absolute priority. I will not let anything else get in its way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. Mr. Kroll.
I wanted to major in costume design. I was planning at the beginning of this year to set an hour every Friday to do my own art stuff. Instead, I'm setting an hour, maybe more, for BSA meetings. The BSA, I'm slowly realizing, is probably one of my biggest passions, one of the things that I will put everything aside for, something that without fail, I am there, I will not miss it. I will put everything else on a back burner, everything else I have to do, everything else that's important aside from grades. Grades comes first. My second thing is the BSA. Has been since I started it and will be until I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian, you'll have 1 minute to respond, but before you do, I want to make very clear. All these responses must be respectful of the candidate. They must be respectful of them as an individual. They are allowed to attack on your views and what you've said, but they are not allowed to be personal attacks on your character. That said, Mr. Dionysian, you have 1 minute to respond. Mr. Dionysian? Arno, are you with us?
Mr. President, can you repeat all of that?
Can everybody else hear me? Okay. I was saying that you cannot make personal attacks. They cannot be insulting on the person's character, but you are allowed to attack what they said and their positions. Do you understand?
Correct. I'm responding to candidate Kroll's
answer. Yes, you have 1 minute.
Statement. I've known candidate Kroll for, I'd say, maybe a couple months. I know he's a great guy, and I love to work with him. But at the end of the day, I'm more confident in my ability to do a good job. And I know Finn will put a great deal of commitment into the BSA. But I have a great deal more experience with this organization. And I think without fault, this is going to be the one thing that I will pay the most attention to.
Mr. Kroll?
with all due respect, the more committed I am, the more I'm going to put to the project. And yes, you might have more experience, but experience, in my personal view, can be outweighed by commitment, dedication, and passion, all of which I have in spades. I'm going to do this, and honestly, I will do this in whatever capacity I can, and I will strive to make that capacity the largest and the biggest I can make it. And there's something to be said about that. There's a power behind that. And experience is one thing. Commitment, dedication, and passion, that's a whole other thing.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Our next question will be started off by Mr. Kroll. Do you believe the BSA should be involved in external issues such as broader citywide problems? I know this has been a point of contention. One candidate, mainly Mr. Kroll, has advocated focusing more on the BUSD, and Mr. Dionysian has advocated a larger, more broad focus for the BSA. So, Mr. Kroll, what is your position? And please explain it.
I think that there are systems and procedures in BUSD that still need change. I think that until I, as a president, would be satisfied with the way BUSD runs and includes its students, I don't think we have the time or should make the time to get involved in local politics. I think we need to be so strong in our core, in us as the students, and then from there, we can move on to local politics. However, I think right now, BSA does not have the time or the ability to expand to that reach. And while I would love to do that, I think this next year we'll be focusing on the centralization of BSA in BUSD.
Mr. Dionysian, your response.
I know a lot of students, friends of mine, and people I've only just met who feel very strongly about local political issues. The past couple of months, we've seen a prime example. I know people who've felt strongly about it on both sides. And the way I see it, if students feel very strongly about a local matter, it needs to be addressed. And I think the BSA needs to give that issue a domain in the democratic process that we share. And yes, there are issues with the district. There are issues with the education, with the system that we have in the district. And there are many protocols and procedures that need to be worked on, primarily transparency, and I'll talk about that more later. But when you have such a committed student population to an issue that they care so deeply about, and it locally affects them, I think we ought to give that a place in our domain.
Mr. Kroll, you have 1 minute to respond.
I think that the commitment of students to outside politics is admirable. However, I think more students are united underneath making change in their own districts and their own daily scholarly lives. And I think that while that change that would bring them together to make a change in a local level is going to be way more effective and more centralized in school level and things that directly affect us. As it is, BUSD, there's ways in the school district, there's interconnected webs of information. And those webs right there are going to be the biggest way to get student outreach and commitment. And so while local issues, yes, could be done with a lot of commitment, we're going to get more done with all the commitment from the students already inside of our district, ready to work.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian, 1 more minute.
It's hardly a binary decision. I think we have the resources to put time and effort into both. Obviously, it's prioritized by which is more pressing in the moment, but it's definitely a circumstantial matter. There can be things in local politics that are more pressing at the time than smaller things in the schooling system, and that's obviously something that's very situational. But disregarding local politics completely and stating an absolute that we know for a fact all issues pertaining to the BOSD are going to take more commitment, are going to be a higher priority than any local political issue, I think is naive.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. The BSA's executive, by the estimate that is given by the Office of the President, is understaffed by about 35 people. Both of you want to expand or create new divisions. How will you allocate the adequate resources and manpower to these divisions when we are already understaffed? Mr. Dionysian, you get your first minute.
Well, only in these past couple months on the campaign trail, even, I've made incredible strides and made so many more contacts that are willing to help. When I talk to people in JBHS and BHS alike, they're eager to participate in the BSA and are very enthusiastic about the concept, the prospect of working with the executive. And I think with the enthusiasm I've seen in that regard, there's going to be no shortage in my administration of staffing with my plan that I proposed.
Mr. Kroll?
Having students who are interested is definitely key. However, I think in order to get more representatives, I think to get BSA more known, we need to reach out to the teachers. I think the teachers could really play a part in raising awareness and explaining who we are in a capacity where they see hundreds of students every day, and maybe we only see the students of one school or 6 classes. And I think that while reaching out to people during the campaign is an incredibly beneficial idea and is overall, regardless of who wins, going to expand the BSA's outreach, I think we also need to focus on the points of contact, the points of information we have in each school, and who's on our side and who isn't, and what we can do to bridge those gaps and bring more students in as we do so.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I would like to take a brief moment to make a small correction. Mr. Kroll, you mentioned that we're talking about increasing the number of representatives. Currently, our Congress is not understaffed. Our Congress is at full capacity. We're understaffed when it comes to the executive divisions. I might have misheard you there, but Mr. Kroll, would you like to?
I didn't say representatives. This is all in reference to the executive board. I think that just to very quickly, just in general, asking the teachers to help us is going to get more students interested and involved, and
okay.
association.
Unfortunately, I can't give you more time. I just wanted to clear that one thing up. Mr. Dunisin, you get 1 minute to respond.
I think teachers are of huge importance. The best way to make sure we're not understaffed is to get the most possible participation. And I'll talk about the Constituency Involvement Initiative to come. But teachers are a huge part of that as well. Just looking at the middle schools, we need to realize that we have a huge membership crisis right now. A large part of our membership comes from seniors, of almost a third, I believe. And they're going to ship out next year. So we need to build a routine that will replace that membership every year. And I've developed a plan to work with specific teachers in the middle schools of Burbank to help fill that gap and to help spread our message to the new freshmen of next year.
Thank you, Mr. Dunisin. Mr. Kroll, 1 more minute.
Again, that's a fantastic idea. The middle school, reaching out to the middle schools is key. I also think that reaching out to the current high schoolers, the current freshmen, is going to be huge. That comes with just awareness and social media and just in general, the functioning of the BSA and the outreach of that. That's kind of a systematic process. However, I think one way to increase membership is to possibly be a presence at events or come up with an event where we can invite us, especially with the incoming of in-person structures. It's going to be a lot easier to expand our reach when we can have face-to-face conversations with people in a school format.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Speaking of in-person conversations in a school format, it brings us to the next question. Next year, hopefully we'll all be in a physical environment, especially for you guys who will be remaining in high school. And so the question on everyone's mind is, what are your plans for in-person meetings next year, seeing as everybody is spread across different school sites? I'm going to give this to Mr. Kroll, I believe. Tony, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it Finn's turn? Okay, good.
The best way to do that would be to find a neutral meeting place for us outside of the high schools for our meetings to happen, preferably Fridays at 5, as that's the time of our current meeting, and then to just have a setup with tables and papers and everything we would need, as well as a camera set up to videotape the meeting, and then to just hold an in-person meeting. Obviously, we would need to find a facility in Burbank, and we cannot. There are definitely struggles to that, and that is definitely something that's going to have to be thought of as soon as we can go back. But I think that the online format, while is amazing in this current period, isn't going to work out, especially when we're in person. It's going to be very convenient to have an in-person location where it's the BSA's hall, even if it's not officially that will become, we can nickname it that, so to speak. And I think that one location is going to also help us solidify as who we are. Right now, we are all together. However, we are separated by a screen and by distance. An in-person room, that dynamic.
Mr. Kroll, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thank you, Mr. Ordokhanian. Mr. Dunisin, you have 1 minute.
I apologize, I did not hear a word my opponent said. However, I can tell you with confidence that I think looking for in-person locations is not going to be an issue. In our city alone, we have 3 high schools and many more middle schools. And after reaching out to many contacts in both of them, I have no doubt that any one of them would be at least multiple of them would be eager to allow us to work there. I know of multiple other facilities people have told me about, but I'm not going to make a statement as of this time. because I don't want to pressure anything or make a public announcement before I've actually contacted those facilities. I don't think it's going to be an issue, and I apologize. I might have to actually yield my time to respond to my opponent because I didn't hear a word he said. It was all garbled. But that's what I think on it.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Dionisian. I'm actually not going to give either of you time to respond because, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, do either of you have a solid plan at this time? I'm going to take that as a no. In that case, we're just going to move on to the next question because there's nothing to debate here.
Can you repeat that question, please, Mr. President?
Are you having audio issues? What's going on?
I'm having a lot of audio issues at this time. I think we can proceed, though. I think it's... Oh, say something?
My question was, neither of you have a solid plan right now, correct?
Okay, yeah, that's a fair assumption.
All right, so we're going to move on then. Thank you, Mr. Dionisian. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Next question. So a lot has been said from both candidates on reopening and how we need to be involved. My question is, how are you going to ensure that students are adequately represented in discussions surrounding reopening? And more specifically, how will you ensure that the BSA is that organization conducting, speaking on behalf of the students? Mr. Dionisian, you go first for 1 minute.
The BSA is by far the largest student-led organization. Oh, actually, I don't want to make that claim, but we're very large and we can speak for the students better than any other organization, I believe, in Burbank. And I went to an EDI committee meeting, I spoke there, and board member Weisberg was there, and I think seeing her eagerness for student representation was definitely refreshing. I have no doubt that other board members will be eager to work with us as well. I think the number one thing we need to push for, though, is making sure any loopholes that we've seen in the past reopening attempts are closed before we even consider supporting this. This is a massive issue. Everybody assumes that a virus is going to follow the same timeline a school reopening schedule would, and unfortunately that's not the case. So any decision we made to support the move or anything else really is going to lie solely on health circumstances. Beyond that, I think pushing for transparency. I apologize.
Sorry, what happened?
Oh, I thought you banged the gavel. That was construction.
No, that's Dad working on something.
Oh.
Sorry, Tony.
I think pushing for transparency.
Pause. Tony, allow Mr. Dionisian to reclaim his time. Can you?
Mr. Dionisian, I'll allow you to reclaim your time.
It's all right, Mr. Odekanian. I will yield my time. I'll yield my time. It's all right.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dionisian, and we apologize for that. Mr. Kroll, you have 1 minute.
Could you restate the question?
Sure, yeah. So how are you going to ensure that students are adequately represented in discussions surrounding reopening, and how will you ensure that the BSA is the entity representing students in those discussions?
At this time, we have a Congress who's eager and ready to help and has committed to doing so. In that aspect, I would send 2 Congress members or 2 other BSA members, whoever has the free time, to the school reopening committee meetings, which occur, I believe, on Wednesdays. And in doing so, they would be there to take part in the discussion, and they would either I or another member of my staff would sit with them to prep beforehand, and then they would go to the table knowing exactly what they would need to say and how we would want to be represented. Additionally, I would want to, in the summer, draft a list of demands, in a sense, or things that this is what we stand for, and this is what we would like you to include in the reopening plan. And then those members who are going out to speak to that committee and the school board by extension would bring along with them those demands.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionisian, 1 minute to respond.
I hope everybody noticed that Mr. Kroll didn't actually answer the question as to how he'll get the representatives there. If we can get them there, obviously prepping them and holding a list of specific matters we'd like addressed would be ideal. However, I think it's naive to believe that we'll just be accepted in. I think we need massive support from the high schools, and that's why I spent the last couple of months working with members from both ASBs and drafting up support for the BSA. That's why I've supported candidates. I've talked to members of the ASB, and I've included them in my campaign plans.
Thank you, Mr. Dionisian. Mr. Kroll, 1 minute. Mr. Kroll, is everything all right? Sure. Mr. Kroll seems to have left us. I guess we're gonna proceed.
Mr. President, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. No, I think we should wait for candidate Kroll.
Unfortunately, we cannot wait. We do have to proceed. We have a set time frame. So we're going to move on if Mr. Kroll does get back to answer the next question. Oh. Mr. Kroll, are you with us?
Yes, my apologies. The automated messaging machine decided to go off right before I was about to unmute, and it was my grandmother, and I love my grandmother to pieces, but that was not what you wanted to hear. The question was, or it was a response to Mr. Dionysian's comment to what I had previously said, correct?
Correct.
Do I have sufficient time to answer that?
You have 1 minute. Go ahead.
The question was, how am I going to ensure that in the literal sense, getting representatives to those meetings would be informing of the address, the date and time, and asking them to go on our behalf. If they can, that would be the process. In a virtual sense, that would be connecting and corresponding with the reopening committee via email, and then getting a link for the meetings. I believe that's what you said. Half of your answer was obscured by the voice messaging machine, but essentially, I would send the representatives as prepared as they could be, either virtually or in person, depending, to those meetings, so that they would come with their papers and their notes and their speeches ready to go and be ready to address what they stand for, what we stand for, what the BSA stands for in reopening plans. Thank you.
I think this is a very important topic, and we have the time. I'm going to allow another round of 1 minute. So, Mr. Dionysian, if you are all right, I'm going to go ahead and give you another minute to talk about this and respond to what Mr. Kroll just said.
Sure. I'm just a little confused, I'd like Mr. Kroll to respond to this in his 1 minute. But is he saying that the committee will just allow any individual, any organization to go and speak on behalf of the students? How are we going to gain that authorization, that legitimacy? How are they going to believe us? How are we going to convince them that we're the right group to represent the students? That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about how we send the people with papers and notes. That's all great, but we need to build the trust that needed to be allowed onto that committee first. How are we known to be a reputable organization? That's the stuff I'm talking about.
Mr. Kroll, 1 minute.
You look at the BSA, you look at a group of organized individuals who are committed to politics in BUSD. That outreach is huge. When I was reached out to by the president and the vice president to join the BSA, it was entirely professional. That outreach, that voice we have, isn't a nilly-willy organization. We aren't just another organization in BUSD. And while all organizations in BUSD are valid, the BSA does command a level of politics that I haven't seen in everything in BUSD. BSA is something new, it's something different, and in that's where we gain our legitimacy from. That's where we gain who we are from, especially as we're new. But in this time, we've gone from being considered fools and all of this from last semester into being a legitimate organization who's helped in public events, who's changed things, who's spoken out on behalf of the students. That stands miles, especially as we're run by the students. We're run by students who are leaving, students who knew this was going to be not a very long period of time for them.
Kroll,
And
your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thank you, Mr. Odokhanian. Alrighty. The next question is somewhat related to what Mr. Kroll was talking about near the end, on memberships and people leaving and whatnot, and something that Mr. Dionysian did bring up earlier, which is that a large base. I don't think it's 1/3. I think it's a little bit less than that, but a significant portion of us the people in the BSA are members are seniors, and they're all graduating. And even if they weren't, we would still need to expand. I think everybody can agree on that. And so my question is, and I think everybody would be interested in knowing, what are your plans on expanding the BSA's reach, on expanding how many people we represent, and better representing them? And more importantly, not more importantly, but perhaps the most important component of that is voter turnout. So my question is, how are you going to improve, expand representation, BSA's reach, and voter turnout? And I'll give you more time if you do need it, but let's start off with 1 minute. Who serves it, Tony?
Arnos.
Arno. Mr. Dionysian, go ahead.
So I think the biggest thing we can do here is work to develop into Monterey as well. It's a high school, it's a completely new domain, and I think they deserve as much student representation as any of our two high schools. The second thing, you talked about seniors leaving. I think we need to look, it's not a really short-term solution. We need to look 2 or 3 years ahead and look back now and say, hey, what can we do now? So we'll get where we need to be in the future. And I think the best thing to do is to help reach out to. I know teachers would be eager to let BSA representatives in to their classes to talk to the students about this exciting prospect. I think reaching out to those middle schools to build a sustainable income, a sustainable flow of new students who are excited and willing to participate in the BSA is a big part. As to participation, the Constituency Involvement Initiative is a big thing. Creating more well-defined avenues and repurposing the policy division to help students write legislation and participate in the democratic process in the Congress directly. As to voter turnout, that is actually a big issue. I'm not entirely sure as of now. I'm not going to BS my way through this question. I think the big thing would be dedicating
Mr. Junison,
section.
your time is up.
I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Junison. Thank you, Mr. Orkhanian. Mr. Kroll.
My first order of business would be to draft election procedures for in-person operations, depending on the state of the school. I think that having in-person elections is going to be huge in gaining voter turnout, member outreach, and just in general, gaining having in-person operations. While virtual, we're doing what we can when we can, and that is amazing. Being able to have a set list of rules and a set list of operations for how we operate in person, how we conduct oneself, who we reach out to, how we discuss, which teachers we talk to. I think having all of that down in writing and publicly available is going to be our best asset in gaining new members. Additionally, with social media, and there is a way to develop a QR code scanner for voting. And we would essentially take that, put it on the flyers for campaigns, and then you'd be able to scan that and vote directly, just to streamline the process. Obviously, many factors depend on this, with the in-person going back, and just what we can do.
Mr. Kroll, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thank you, Mr. Orkhanian. Mr. Junison, you have 1 minute.
A large part of the time spent by the executive during election seasons is on ads and all print media and social media and all these things. I think the best way we can work to create more efficient ads and publications in the sense is to create a branch of the communications division focused directly on producing these kinds of video ads, posters, flyers, etc., Instagram presence and all. And the more we can staff that, I know personally many people who are interested and have approached me about this prospect would be willing to work on video editing so that we can maximize our productivity in that field and get our message out to as many people as possible for elections.
Thank you, Mr. Junison. Mr. Kroll.
Along with that, I think having designated people for in-person speaking, and I think being able to use the school's resources or the school's microphone at lunch to talk about the BSA. I think that while Instagram and technology is also an incredible asset, I think publicly getting out on campus during lunch and saying, "Hi, I'm Finn Kroll from the BSA, and I want to talk to you today about politics and BUSD." I think that's going to be huge. I think people are going to sit down and listen to that. I think, especially because it's almost a year of this now. We haven't had people doing that at lunch. So when we go back, people are going to be ready to listen and eager to hear what we have to say, especially at lunchtime, because that's when most people are out and about, making lunch.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Our next question is going to come from, let's do it from the audience. Representative Kai Singh has asked, what will be the first thing you do if you become president? And by the way, for those who are wondering, we're taking questions not from the YouTube chat, but from the Discord chat. So if you're in YouTube, go ahead and throw your questions down in the Discord. And Mr. Junison is going to go first. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. 1 minute.
So one of the first things okay, thank you. So one of the first things I do is help build the Constituency Involvement Initiative, and this would create well-defined avenues for people to reach their representatives. It would create well-defined avenues for them to participate and write legislation. We'd assign executive members to help them with that sort of thing, and we repurpose the policy division to be more aimed towards that. One of the next things I do would be establish the Congressional Library. As we know, our record of legislation right now is a mess. It's almost nowhere to be found for people who want to read it. Updating the website is a big thing, and I think the more we do that, the better, the more transparent we can be, and the better we can complete our goals. So I think beginning these foundational things are one of the most important things to do. I'd also reach out to the ASBs in my capacity. I'd reach out to the Board of Education. I'd like to speak to City Council at one of their public comments. There's a lot we could do to begin for a long year's work ahead. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Dionisi and Mr. Kroll.
The first thing I would do in office would be to sit down with the BTA, the BUSD school board, the JBHS ASB, the Burbank ASB, Burroughs ASB, and Monterey ASB if we can get there, and talk about goals and long-term plans. I think that we need to put BSA on an equal platform, and we need to set goals together. I think the best way to continue to move forward and to change and grow in this next year is to collaboratively discuss what the adults in this district are thinking, what the students are thinking, and what the students in the high school level are thinking. Students being BSA and so forth. I think that direct conversation, whether in person or on an online format, is going to be our best asset. I think that having everyone, one or two representatives from each of those organizations, is going to be a huge way to bring BUSD together. Right now, I think we do a lot of disjointed operation, which works and is fantastic for how the BSA runs, but communication shouldn't be disjointed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionisi in 1 minute.
I think incorporating teachers is one of the best things we can do. That's why a teacher that I know, Ms. Diana, I've asked the president of the BTA, we've had some very fruitful discussions. We've had some very productive conversations with each other about the BSA, and she's always been eager to work with me to help spread the message and advertise in the classes and beyond. And I think beyond working with teachers, I think it's naive to believe that with our historically strained relationship with the Burbank High ASB, that we can just sit them down and we can all just have a nice long chat and everybody's going to have fun with each other. I think that's a great idea and it might work, but I'm not willing to take that risk, which is why I spent the last couple months working with candidates from the Burbank High ASB elections and talking to office holders and collecting their support for potential cooperation with the BSA in the future. I think working in the short term is not going to be as effective as looking back at what we've been doing and continuing that on into our administration.
Thank you, Mr. Dionisi. Did we give both candidates a chance to respond? No, Mr. Kroll. Oh yeah, Mr. Kroll gets 1 more minute. Is that right? Yep. Go ahead.
With all due respect, Mr. Dionisian, I did not say that this conversation be a willy-nilly conversation just for funsies. That's not what I implied at all. This conversation would be each member bringing a list of goals and demands in verbatim to the table, and we would all discuss it as equals, as united equals for the schools. I think there's something to be said about having conversations with people who are in this together, essentially. We all seek to represent people in BUSD, whether it be BSA with the students, BTA with the teachers, JBHS ASBs, JBHS BHS ASBs for the students in their respective high schools. We can bring that representation of everyone together, and I think that's not something to be underestimated.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. All right. At this time, I have an audience question that's been submitted anonymously because it's a little bit incendiary. We're going to allow Mr. Dionisi to go first, even though he went first last time, because it is directed as his campaign. Mr. Dionisi, the Kroll campaign has accused the Dionisi campaign of stealing multiple campaign platforms. What do you have to say about that? And then Mr. Kroll, what do you have to say about that? Mr. Dionisi, you have 1 minute.
So Mr. Kroll the allegation Mr. Kroll was referring to was my subdivision of multilingual affairs under communication and his linguistic division. I might have mispronounced. I might have missaid the name, but basically, I had a town hall a couple weeks ago, and this question was posed to me. And it's a very interesting point because I realized, should there be an ELD student who wants to participate, we have a huge language barrier, and we should do everything to take that off. So I agree. I agree with the assessment that we need. We need to remove that language barrier by translating legislation and such, as well as key forms to participate in the BSA. At the same time, I like to remind everybody that we have a communications division, and linguistics fits quite explicitly under that category. There is no reason to be creating divisions willy-nilly while an important topic, when we have a division dedicated to something just for that. I think the mission statement of the communications division is to craft our message and deliver it to the Burbank students. I think to be able to craft them, that includes in all languages, and I don't understand why any translation should fall elsewhere.
Mr. Dionisi, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Dionisi. Mr. Kroll, 1 minute.
I would like to ask you that you don't use the words willy-nilly to describe my actions or anything intended by my campaign. It's kind of disrespectful, and I don't appreciate it. On that note, I think that putting languages under a division is kind of discrediting to all of what language is and how communication shouldn't just be glossed over. It shouldn't be a subdivision. I think that language barrier in BUSD is such an issue and such an important cause to be a part of that it needs a division. It needs a group of people who are completely committed to translating and interpreting and explaining in multiple languages. I think that by putting it as a subdivision, we limit our power. And honestly, that's not something I stand for. Limiting our way in which we can represent the students, even if that's through language, that's something I'm going to commit time to. That's something I'm going to make a whole division for, because that is incredibly important. No BUC student under the BSA should feel that they don't understand something that's going on. With that, that's what the linguistic.
Mr. Kroll, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I'm not going to allow Mr. Diniz to respond just for a moment because we do have a question next up, literally next up, about the linguistics division, because I know it is a hot point. But I want an answer to the original question that was posed by an anonymous member of the BSA, which is, what do you both have to say about the accusation that the Dionysian campaign stole multiple campaign platforms from the Kroll campaign? Mr. Dionysian, you have 1 minute, and please stick to the question. And Mr. Kroll, same to you.
I apologize. I have not plagiarized anything. The issue was raised to me at a town hall, and I think translating things is of great importance. Candidate Kroll and I disagree on the legal status of the group committed to this. I think a subdivision is plenty, and I think a group of committed people can work anywhere. I haven't plagiarized that. Furthermore, I think that anonymous question maker, I'll call it that, was also referring to candidate Kroll's statement about transparency. That wasn't, I hardly call that an accusation of plagiarism, but he did urge me to advocate for a bill that I wrote. The bill that mandates the publication of congressional sessions is one that I fiercely advocated for post-passing, and it's the one I wrote. So I'd like everybody to bear that in mind.
Mr. Kroll, you have 1 minute.
I'm not denying that you wrote that legislation. However, the timing of my announcement of the Linguistic Outreach Division at a Friday meeting and then your post about translated documents seemed suspicious. And so my campaign and I decided to bring something to the table and simply say that if you took inspiration from, I think in general, both of us should be stating where we got our ideas from. I would like to publicly state that I got my idea for the Linguistic Outreach Division from a Mr. Everhuerta at an Instagram live I did after BSA meeting. Where did you get your idea from? And why does it seem that you took it from me and didn't give me credit?
I'm going to give Mr. Diniz an opportunity to respond in about 30 seconds, and then that's it. We're going to move on.
Mr. Kroll, I urge your campaign not to make assumptions because Mr. Everhuerta was the same individual who asked me this question. And it's all right if we have similar goals, but I'd urge you not to make unfounded assumptions that I've started plagiarizing your ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. We will now proceed to the next question, which I'm sure you will both have a lot to say on, which is it's about the linguistics division. Both candidates have voiced support for some form of translation program for ELD students. The scope of the program, how it's run, and its legal designation is hotly contested. I'm going to allow Mr. Dionysian to go first here. Mr. Kroll to go first here. You have 1 minute. What is your position on the linguistics division and why?
The Linguistics Outreach Division should be a division that reaches out to the students in BUSD under the BSA's umbrella. It would be in charge of translating Instagram posts, subtitling BSA videos, and then having designated people available to interpret the legislation for ELD students. Additionally, it would include a way to foster and bring in ELD representatives into Congress. I think that while there is a language barrier, that should be broken, and that having a separate division for that within itself is the best way to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian?
I think it's unlikely that many ELD students will join our program. However, if there is even one that is interested in it, I want to make sure that no barrier would disincentivize anybody from joining our program, just like any other English speaker. So I think, I believe, I'm not going to make assumptions, but I believe very firmly, not as firmly as Mr. Kroll, I can't make that assumption, I don't know what he's thinking. I believe very firmly that this language barrier must be taken down, and I think it's an important prospect. That's why I proposed the subdivision of multilingual affairs. Just because it's under a smaller legal designation doesn't mean it's any less important or any less active. I'm only placing it there because we have a communications division for that purpose. Linguistics does not mean what my opponent thinks it means.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. Mr. Kroll?
Honestly, I think that the Linguistic Outreach Division and the Communications Division could work together. However, I think that, as Mr. President has said, the Communications Division are not explicitly, in general, there's understaffment in the BSA. While the Linguistic Outreach Division would be adding more people to that, there are people who would be interested in doing so. One of them, Ms. Arpisarian, she's already been helping me translate my own posts as of this. That's just one example. As it is, having the Communications Division ally with the Linguistic Outreach Division would foster more work turnout, more togetherness, more communication, and more breaking down of that barrier. The more people we have on this in different capacities, the better off we'll be. And that's why that should be a whole division, not simply a subdivision. While the prospect of having a subdivision could work, I think that the more power the Linguistic Outreach Division has, plus what it can get from an alliance with the Communications Division, is in the best benefit of BSA.
Mr. Kroll, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. 1 minute.
Another division does not mean more people or more capabilities or more power. It is simply a designation, and because of the definition and the nature of the idea of translating things and making sure that message can be crafted for any student of Burbank, regardless of the language it speaks, falls promptly under the communications mission statement. And that is what the division was created for. I don't want to limit or restrict their power or the number of people that come on. It is simply a name, a title, and the title belongs under the communications division.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We are now going to proceed to our next question. And this one, I know we've been getting a little bit heated here, but that's okay. We want lively discussion. Let's just remember to say respectful of the individual's character, and that's going to be especially important here. And with this question, I'm going to ask you to name why you believe you are more qualified and what makes you qualified in general to be the president of the BSA. And it's important that we say this with all due respect to the other candidate, and we're not attacking them personally or their character. I believe it is Mr. Dionysian's turn. You have 1 minute.
So, Mr. President, people tell me I'm taking on too much. They say, Arno, you're doing too many things. How are you going to keep the BSA a priority? How are you going to keep mock trial a priority? How are you going to keep solar patrol a priority? I like to frame it as I've been able to do all these things and still, arguably, keep my sanity. I think, and now knowing that the BSA is such a priority as it is, and now seeing my capabilities with so many things, I think it's almost inarguable that I'll be able to put any effort necessary, any commitment to take the BSA where it needs to be and to carry out my plans. I got a great team to work with me. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be able to do this myself, folks. I got a great team, so many dedicated people who are helping me out. They're helping me write policy, they're helping me carrying it out. They're helping me just in general. They're supporting me. And with them by my side and my work ethic and the work ethic of everybody in the BSA, I think it is almost unfathomable that we won't be able to achieve what we're trying to.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. Mr. Kroll.
The topic of experience was brought up earlier. And while I feel that Mr. Dionysian believes his experience is going to entitle him to succeed, which if that happens, I think that there's something to be said about commitment and passion, plus experience I have. I've been in the Youth in Government program in Burbank for roughly a year, I think. 1 year of the, not relevant how long I've been at, specific dates, not relevant. I have been doing this. And what that has shown me was how to work in a mock government procedure. And those skills, that discussion, the way you discuss and the way you write legislation, the way I ran the Mayor's Task Force Commission, I was Mayor's Commission Chair of an entire force within an organization that was mimicking local government. The way I ran that, everything I learned in the months I spent doing that was huge. I learned so much about government and politics along with that.
Kroll, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian, 1 minute.
Unfortunately, I am 1 year younger than Mr. Kroll. I was born 1 year later, and there's nothing I can do about that. He's been in high school for 1 year, and coming up on 2, I've hardly been there for a year. But in that one freshman year, I have done as much as I possibly can. And I must admit, I'm not in the Youth in Government program. It sounds very enticing. But at the same time, I've been as active in government, and I've been trying to educate myself as much as possible. And I think in that regard, I am as well versed as I need to be to successfully operate the BSA and to run congressional sessions, to write legislation, and anything else that would call for these skills.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. Mr. Kroll, one last minute.
I spent the last year learning what kind of person I was. The pandemic was not an easy year for me. Neither was the year before that. However, in that I learned that I'm creative, I'm fierce and spirited, and I'm going to use that for the BSA. I'm going to use everything about me, everything that makes me fit in who I am to serve me. And I think there's something to be said about that commitment, along with the experience I have in government and the passion I have for it. And that is my dog background, along with my adorable doggo named Buddy. I think that there's something to be said about how much I like to work with people and how much I like language and everything that is me. Everything about me is going to enforce all of my decisions. I think differently than Mr. Dionysian because I led a different life. And that difference is what sets us apart and what sets us apart.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Alrighty, we are going to move on to the last question that I have, and then we're going to take one last look at who else has questions in the Discord server. Take a moment to talk about your vice president. Tell us who they are, tell us what you think about them, and why you chose to nominate them to be your vice president if you are elected. I believe it is Finn's turn, yeah? Mr. Kroll, go ahead.
So the week before elections, we had permission to reach out to people who would be interested in our campaign. I didn't actually reach out to Miss Sarion. She reached out to me, and that went miles. She said she knew exactly what she wanted, exactly how she wanted to do things, and exactly what she wanted from me. And that certainty, that level of certainty, I knew instantly she was someone I wanted by my side. I wanted to see how I could work with her commitment, with her passion, with all the amazing extracurriculars she does, all of her experience in the arts programs, and her linguistic abilities. I wanted to get to know her, and I have, and I'm so glad I did, but I wanted her on my team because she said, I want to know that you're the only person I'm considering. She wanted to be number one to me, in respect to me, and that was something that went absolutely miles. There was no one else after that I would have settled for. It was Miss Arion all the way. The second she did that, she inspired me. That was it.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll.
Mr. President, are you okay?
I'm perfectly fine. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian, you have 1 minute. Mr. Dionysian, you're... Hold on. We've lost Arno. Aren't you there? Earth to Arno.
I hear you, but I don't. Okay, there you are.
Go ahead.
Mr. Kroll, you talked about your vice president wanting you to be the... I'm not going to go there. I apologize. My vice president, Nana Bambi, I chose her about a week ago, too, and I announced her fairly recently. All her qualifications are online on our website, on our post, and she was one of the most qualified people I could have chosen. She's active in so many clubs. She's talked to board members about issues plaguing the students. There was so much that she's done and so much she can bring to the BSA. And she took the initiative to come to me. She didn't pressure me. She respected my decision. And I think there's so much she can bring to the table, especially with all the new things that we're planning to do. They're right up her alley. She's co-chair of the EI committee, and I believe there's nothing me, her, and my whole team can accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. I'm not going to give another minute on that. I think that suffices. Arno, are you frozen? Did we lose Arno again? I'm going to kick him out. Arno, you there? Arno, are you there?
Hello? Yep, I hear you. I'm here.
Arno, can you switch to your phone, please?
Gotta give me a second. Or actually, no, it'll... Okay, yeah.
Just switch to your phone. I'm going to disconnect you. I can't disconnect right now. Hey, everyone. Give me just 1 second. We're currently dealing with some technical difficulties where Arno is not doing so well. He'll be back in just a minute. So I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to ask this question from the audience. I'm gonna ask this of Mr. Kroll, and then when Arno comes back in, I'll let him answer the same question. So Mr. Kroll, 1 minute. How will you reach out to other student organizations? Go ahead. From Mr. Holden Wise.
I think by simply finding out meeting times and then showing up at meetings. I just recently reached out to the EDI committee and ended up speaking with them. I also, there's one other club I went, the BHS Creative Writing Club. I think it's just a matter of finding the points of contact, the Instagrams or the presidents or members of the cabinets, and saying, hey, I'm interested in coming to this meeting, and I'd like to just take part in what you have to offer. And I think that's going to be the best way. And then from there, conversations can start. I think on a bigger scale, the ASBs, same process, same discussion. The reaching out to the advisors, I think, because the advisors will be able to advise the ASBs as to what they'd like to do and how they would like to meet. And just in general, cordial communication. Hi, my name is Finn Kroll. I'd like to come to a meeting and see what you guys are about. Is going to be the best and most straightforward way to do so, especially in an in-person format, as I do have a lunch period and we'll be happy to spend it creating other clubs.
I think we just heard Mr. Dionis come back in. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Arno, can you check your camera real quick? Yeah, Arno, I see you in there. Can you confirm you're in there? Arno, are you on your phone?
Hello?
Arno, hi. Can you hear us?
Hi, hello? I
Hello.
can hear you.
Can you turn on your camera, please?
I'm gonna try.
Alrighty. We apologize, guys, for the technical difficulties. Alright, we're fine. I'm going to ask you the same question that I just asked Mr. Kroll. This is from Mr. Holden Wise. How will you reach out to other student organizations? 1 minute, go.
Right, so I've worked with Mr. Everhuerta. I've worked with Nana Bambi. She's the co-chair of the EDI committee. They've connected me with a lot of these. The EDI committee in particular has connected me with a lot of cool organizations like our JVHS Armenian Club. Maybe there's something we can do with them. And then I've also worked with the JVHS ASB. I've reached out to them. I think they're a massive networking priority, massive networking advantage, my mistake. But there's also one thing I like to point out. Both our schools are huge. They got a large population, but they're not big enough so that personal networking still won't know. I'll know one guy, he'll know another guy, and he'll know another guy. And eventually I'm going to get to an organization I need to get to, and we're going to connect, and we're going to make the progress we need to. I think that Kroll here agreed to say, I think personal connections are the one thing everybody seems to underestimate.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dionysian. Now, this is a joke question to cool the tension from Mr. Jeffrey Dalton Edward Stein II, a BSA representative. He says, would you rather be in a room full of puppies or a room full of kittens? If neither, what room full of adorable animals would you rather be in? Mr. Dionysian, you get this first for 1 minute.
Puppies, hands down. Not even close. Not even close, man.
Mr. Kroll?
Kitties! Kittens are so cute! Arno, ugh! Kittens!
Mr. Kroll, let's not attack on somebody's character now. Let's keep this civil.
If the students of Burbank didn't know who they were voting for before, they certainly do now. This has created created a line straight.
The
down
gentleman
middle.
will suspend. Thank you, Mr. Dionysian, and thank you, Mr. Kroll. With that, I will allow you both 30 seconds to give your closing statements. Mr. Kroll, you're first.
Hi, I'm Finn Kroll. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm running for BSA president because I want to be somebody who can fully represent all that BUST students are and who we are in the moment, who we were, and who we will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Dionysian?
Look, I have a friend who only a couple weeks ago came to me. He told me there's a problem on campus. I'm not going to say in particular which friend or what the issue was, but I was able to reach out and give him answers and give him direct responses to how the school plans to address this. We reached out to a school board member and we're looking into it. I think it's really concerning that my friend would really not have gotten these answers had he not been lucky enough to have known one of the candidates. I think I have the skills, my vice president has the skills, my team has the skills and the work ethic to take the BSA to where it needs to be. Oh, it's shorter than I thought. My mistake.
Yeah, we'll only give you 30 seconds. Anyways, thanks, folks. I want to thank both the candidates, Mr. Diniz and Mr. Kroll. And I want to say, I'm going to make a brief spiel here. I want to say I have had the opportunity of getting to know both of these fine folks. One of them since he was born, and the other one for a little bit shorter of a time. And believe me, they are both fine candidates and both fully qualified to take over the office of the president. I'll tell you this, I am feeling completely confident that Tony's legacy and my legacy and the legacy of all the seniors who worked on this organization, and there's a lot of people who contributed even in a small way, and you guys all know who you are, and I'm going to be thanking you guys individually at the end of the school year. But all of our work is going to be carried on by one of these two gentlemen and the teams behind them. And I want everybody to know this. These two guys are up here right now duking it out, but believe me, there's a lot of people standing behind them. And those people deserve just as much credit, if not more. And I will hold you both to that. I want both of you to ensure that you will give those people the credit they deserve. Tony and I, we know this. You got to make sure that people are valued. And that's my little one bit of advice is do not take your team for granted, because I know both of you have fantastic teams. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call to a close the BSA 2021 presidential debate. I want to remind everyone that voting begins next Friday, I believe. Yeah, no, this upcoming Friday, Friday the 30th, and closes at midnight on Sunday the 2nd. We should have the results Monday morning. So it's going to be very exciting. And remember, candidates, you need to reach the minimum threshold of, I believe it was 100 or 200 votes. I believe it was 100 votes. Let's try to meet and exceed that. And yeah. All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good night. Oh.